Welcome to Nation Scope Podcast. I'm Jordan.
And I'm Jamie.
And today we are diving into, well, it's a political and legal showdown that honestly sounds like something out of a thriller novel.
It really does, Jordan. A genuine cliffhanger that almost went over the edge, just hours before disaster struck.
Yeah, we're talking about September 29th, 2025. You had the executive branch ready to basically execute this massive purge.
Huge.
Eliminating 532 full-time government jobs, effectively gutting the U.S. Agency for Global Media, USAGM, the parent agency of Voice of America, VOA.
That's right. This was poised to just dismantle America's main international media network. The axe was literally about to fall.
But then, the intervention.
At the absolute last minute, U.S. District Judge Royce C. Lamberth stepped in. He issued a temporary suspension of the whole plan.
Stopping the cuts just hours before they happened.
And forcing the administration to hit pause. Yeah. And this ruling, it wasn't just some administrative tweet. It felt like a real institutional defense, of the federal civil service itself.
That's really the core of our deep dive today, isn't it? How did things get so critical, so close to the wire, that a judge had to slam on the emergency brake on hundreds of government layoffs?
Yeah.
So our mission here is to unpack the legal fight, the political maneuvering that led to this crisis. We want to trace this whole conflict over VOA's independence, presidential power, and really the future of career civil servants. We'll be drawing on the sources we've looked at.
And if you zoom out a bit, this ruling was really the climax of a deep and pretty long-running conflict.
Okay.
It's rooted in this fundamental disagreement over what U.S. international broadcasting should even be. Is it independent journalism? Or is it basically a political tool for whoever's in power?
Right. So let's jump straight into the immediate trigger. What specifically set off the 2025 crisis? It seems to trace back to Executive Order 14238.
That's the one, issued March 14th, 2025.
And it was very specific, ordering USAGM be reduced to the minimum presence and function required by law. That phrase, minimum presence, I think that sounds deliberately vague.
Oh, absolutely. You could call it weaponized ambiguity, really, because what does minimum even mean in that context?
Exactly.
And the administration, well, they grabbed onto that ambiguity to justify actions that went way beyond just, simple restructuring.
And the impact was immediate.
Instant and, frankly, shocking. The very next day, March 15th, VOA stopped broadcasting. For the first time in its entire 83-year history.
83 years. Just think about that.
Yeah.
VOA weathered the Cold War, countless global crises.
Yep.
Only to be silenced by an executive order from its own government.
And it wasn't just silenced. Almost all the staff, roughly 1,300 full-time USAGM employees, were immediately put on administrative leave.
So total paralysis.
Pretty much. Created this immediate operational halt. Then, fast forward to late August 2025, the administration makes it formal. They announce the reduction in force, the RIF, targeting those 532 specific jobs.
And the official line of the justification from acting CEO Kari Lake at the time was that this was needed to improve the functioning of a very broken agency. But wait, if the goal is improvement, why would you start by completely disabling the agency, silencing its broadcasts, putting everyone on leave? That logic feels thin.
It definitely invites skepticism, doesn't it, about the real motive?
Yeah.
Because we know from the source material, the White House was, at the same time, using this rhetoric calling VOA radical propaganda.
Oh.
So when you say you want to improve function, but your actions actually eliminate its function and silence its voice, well, it strongly suggests the real goal might have been political dismantlement, just dressed up as reform.
And this goes beyond just internal management, right? There's a huge constitutional dimension here involving Congress.
Absolutely critical, because Congress had specifically appropriated funds, $875 million for USAGM for that fiscal year.
Okay.
And crucially, $260 million of that was earmarked specifically for VOA operations.
So by putting staff on leave, stopping broadcasts, the executive branch was basically just ignoring Congress's funding decision.
They were effectively impounding funds that Congress had allocated, unilaterally canceling out a specific law, a statutory directive.
Which is a direct challenge to Congress's whole power of the purse.
Exactly. It forces the courts into the middle of this separation of powers clash.
Okay, so let's dig into that legal side then. The lawsuits were filed, Widakuswara v. Lake, Abramowitz v. Lake. Now, the plaintiffs brought up the big constitutional claims, like First Amendment, separation of powers. But what was the actual legal ground Judge Lamberth used to stop the layoffs right at the deadline?
Well, interestingly, it wasn't the big constitutional fireworks. It was something maybe less flashy, but procedurally lethal, the Administrative Procedure Act, the APA.
No, the APA, okay.
The judge found the administration's actions were arbitrary and capricious.
Right, you hear that term. Break that down for us.
Yeah.
Arbitrary and capricious sounds like legalese. But what did it mean practically for what the administration did? Or rather, what they didn't do?
It's basically the rule that says federal agencies have to show their homework. They need to provide a reasoned explanation, some documented justification for any major action, especially something as huge as shutting down an 83-year-old network and firing over 500 people.
And Lamberth found.
He found, and I'm quoting here, a complete absence of any analysis whatsoever to justify either the shutdown or the massive layoffs.
So it wasn't just that their reasoning was weak. They essentially failed to provide any reasoning that met the legal standard. Like, they just didn't do the basic procedural steps.
That's the gist of it. The procedure failure itself, this lack of reasoned decision-making required by the APA, made the whole action illegal, even before you get to the merits of whether it was a good or bad policy.
Wow.
And the judge, he was really forceful about it. He specifically called out the agency's concerning disrespect for the court, accused them of obfuscation, basically hiding their plans.
Hiding the ball.
Yeah, he even noted their conduct would readily support contempt proceedings. That's incredibly strong language from a federal judge about executive branch actions.
And the judge himself, Judge Lamberth. His background is pretty significant here too, isn't it?
Very relevant. He's a senior judge, yes, but he was nominated way back in 1987 by a Republican president, Ronald Reagan.
Which makes it much harder to just dismiss the ruling as, purely partisan politics.
Exactly. It kind of neutralizes that easy talking point. His focus clearly seemed to be on the law, on procedural integrity, and on the court's authority.
And you mentioned the court's authority. The ruling wasn't just about stopping the layoffs in that moment, was it? There was a bigger principle at stake for the court itself.
Absolutely. If you look at the core goal stated in the ruling, Judge Lamberth said that by freezing the RIF, he was preventing the administration from creating what's called a fait accompli.
A done deal.
Right. A situation where even if he later ruled fully against them, it would be too late. The staff would be gone, the agency dismantled. His earlier order to restore VOA broadcasting would have become unenforceable. So he was defending the judiciary's power to actually enforce its own orders against the executive branch.
Okay, so this 2025 crisis, it feels sudden. But to really understand the gravity, we have to look back, don't we? This wasn't the first attempt to gain control over USAGM.
Not at all. You really need to talk about Michael Pack's time as CEO. That was, what, 2020 to 2021?
Right. His tenure was incredibly tumultuous.
It was essentially the dry run. It established the playbook, you could say. It kicked off almost immediately with what people started calling the Wednesday night massacre.
I remember that.
Yeah, where he just summarily fired the heads of Radio Free Europe, Radio Liberty, Radio Free Asia, Middle East Broadcasting Networks, the Open Technology Fund. Basically decapitated the leadership across the board.
And his main goal seemed to be breaking down that statutory firewall we hear about.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us more about that firewall. What is it and why was it such a target?
So the statutory firewall, it's a legal requirement actually written into the law, the International Broadcasting Act. It mandates that USAGM and its networks, like VOA, have to maintain strict journalistic independence.
Meaning free from political interference.
Exactly. Free from political direction from the White House or State Department. The idea is to ensure VOA is seen globally as a credible, objective news source, not just, propaganda for whoever's president.
So Pack was trying to tear that wall down.
That was his primary strategic aim. He wanted the administration to be able to directly influence editorial content and personnel decisions, control the message.
And did the system push back against Pack's attempts back then?
Oh, significantly. Both judicially and within the government itself. Another judge, Judge Beryl Howell, issued an injunction back in November 2020.
What did that do?
It specifically barred Pack from interfering in personnel decisions or editorial judgments at the networks. But it wasn't just the courts.
Okay.
The U.S. Office of Special Counsel, which is an independent government watchdog agency, investigated and found a substantial likelihood of wrongdoing under Pack. They cited gross mismanagement and abuse of authority. Pretty damning findings.
Gross mismanagement. Abuse of authority. Was there a financial cost associated with all this turmoil under Pack?
A huge one. According to the sources, Pack's leadership apparently spent over $1.6 million just to hire an outside private law firm. And what was that firm doing? Conducting investigations into senior agency executives. Basically, retaliatory probes against the very people who were raising legal flags about his actions, trying to defend that firewall.
So $1.6 million of taxpayer money spent essentially investigating the whistleblowers or the internal critics.
That's what the sources suggest. It's a staggering figure spent fighting internal resistance to his agenda.
Okay, now here's where the narrative gets really, well, cynical, right? This circular logic starts to emerge. The source material strongly suggests that all the chaos Pack created, the firings, the investigations, the waste, the undermining of morale,
All of it.
that created the very conditions he and later Kari Lake would describe as a very broken agency.
Precisely. They essentially broke the system, or at least created massive dysfunction.
Or liberal.
Well, the effect was profound dysfunction. And then years later, Kari Lake uses that very brokenness as the public rationale for dismantling it completely in 2025.
It's like setting a fire and then blaming the building for being flammable.
It's a self-fulfilling prophecy, engineered to reach a desired political outcome. The 2025 RIF wasn't really a new idea. It was arguably just the second attempt, maybe more aggressive, certainly more procedurally sloppy, to achieve the kind of political control that PAC was legally blocked from getting back in 2020-21.
So the court stopped the 2025 layoffs for now. But let's zoom out again. What does this whole protracted battle mean for the bigger picture? Beyond the jobs at USAGM, what are the stakes for, say, U.S. soft power and for how our government itself runs?
Well, the attempt to cripple or silence VOA, it's a profound self-inflicted wound when it comes to American influence globally. USAGM, remember, reaches a massive audience, estimated around 427 million people worldwide.
Huge reach.
That network is a critical counter-narrative. It pushes back against state-controlled propaganda from places like China, Russia, Iran. When you silence VOA, or even just damage its credibility, you create an information vacuum.
And our adversaries are happy to fill that vacuum.
Absolutely eager to fill it. So weakening VOA directly undermines U.S. national security interests and our ability to promote democratic values abroad. It's shooting ourselves in the foot, basically.
And then domestically, you mentioned this reflects a bigger ideological fight, the whole deep state narrative.
It really feels like a microcosm of that, yes. These aggressive moves against USAGM seem animated by this narrative that casts career civil servants, the institutional experts, as somehow being politically biased obstacles.
And as deep state actors trying to block the president's agenda.
Exactly. It's part of a broader ideological project, it seems, aimed at deconstructing the traditional idea of a nonpartisan expert administrative state.
Which brings us straight to that term, Schedule F. How does the attempt at mass layoffs at USAGM connect to that controversial plan? Is it like a test case?
You could definitely see it that way. The mass RIF at USAGM is almost a perfect example of the kind of power a future administration might wield if Schedule F were implemented.
Remind us what Schedule F is again.
Schedule F was this plan, proposed earlier, that would reclassify potentially tens of thousands of federal employees who are in policy-related roles. It would strip away their standard civil service protections.
Meaning they could be fired easily.
Fired essentially without cause, at the will of the political leadership. It would effectively politicize huge sections of the federal workforce that are currently meant to be nonpartisan and based on expertise.
So when Judge Lamberth stepped in to protect the USAGM employees, he wasn't just saving jobs at one agency. He was, in a way, defending this whole model of a professional, nonpartisan civil service.
That's the larger context, absolutely. The defense of USAGM's independence and its career staff becomes a defense of the entire post-war model of government, one built on expertise and continuity, insulated somewhat from purely political purges.
That puts the stakes incredibly high.
It's a very high-stakes game being played over the fundamental nature of the administrative state. The judiciary's role in defending USAGM staff is, fundamentally, about defending the institutional integrity of government itself against these efforts to politicize it root and branch.
This has been a really fascinating deep dive into the legal weeds and the political power plays. Let's try to summarize the core takeaways for you, our listener. What are the main things to keep in mind here?
I think there are two big ones.
Okay.
First, it's kind of striking that the most effective immediate weapon against this executive action wasn't necessarily the big constitutional arguments. It was the Administrative Procedure Act, those procedural rules about reasoned decision-making.
The requirement to show your work.
Exactly. That proved to be the quickest, most decisive check, maybe succeeding where those broader, potentially harder-to-win constitutional claims might have taken too long or failed to get that immediate stopgap injunction.
Okay, that's one. What's the second key takeaway?
The second is recognizing this pattern. The 2025 incident wasn't isolated. It represents the judiciary stepping in to block a second, arguably more forceful attempt to politically capture a federal agency.
Building on the PAC playbook.
Right. It shows this consistent executive aim that was only stopped literally at the 11th hour by Judge Lamberth's really quite forceful judicial intervention.
So as we wrap up, here's a final thought to leave you with. Judge Lamberth used a sweeping injunction here. It was essential, as he said, to preserve the agency, to prevent that fait accompli. But we know the Supreme Court has been expressing growing skepticism about these kinds of broad, nationwide injunctions where one district judge can halt a policy across the whole country.
That's definitely a trend.
So the question becomes, if those tools become less available to lower courts, how much harder will it be in the future for the judiciary to act as that emergency brake, to defend the integrity of the civil service against these kinds of broad, potentially ideologically driven executive actions? Something for you to think about.
Yeah, the future of that procedural defense might depend heavily on the willingness and the ability of judges to issue these broad remedies. It's a fragile balance.
You've been listening to Nation Scope Podcast, where Jordan and Jamie analyze the stories shaping America and the world. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll catch you next time.